play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo's dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn of The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhart of Hoops. Wednesday, April 14th, well removed from the season, into the doldrums of the offseason, if you want to say that. I feel like the transfer portal is exciting, right? But the coaching carousel is starting to slow down. Like, I feel like a sense of pause is on the way.
This is how we know you're a golf writer now. You don't have to manufacture the doldrums of the summer. We're talking August, September. This is the easy time of the off season right here. You're going way too ahead of yourself. You're going to call this the doldrums of the off season.
I'm done. I already checked out, man.
I do think it's interesting though. The transfer portal, is becoming almost it's such a big storyline the way things are playing out. I wonder if that'll help kind of create some more does that create more of an off-season interest in college basketball where it's this teams are making their whole rosters left and right all across the country? Is that going to be free agency in professional sports? Do you think that could be a benefit, or is it all a negative?
That's a great point. There was an old story. I don't remember if it was, I think it was a Drew McGarry story. I don't remember if it was Ringer or Grantland. It might have been old enough now to be a Grantland joint. But it was about that very subject of when NBA's free agency transitioned into being just as big of a story as the regular season itself. And you're right. We're probably entering a point where college basketball is going to get to that point where, especially these few months, there used to be the coaching carousel and all that, but now that there's essentially free agency, for lack of a better term, I think player movement probably extends college basketball's news cycle. Through May, probably up until the draft, at least.
Yeah, it's the one.
There used to be that dip, right? It was a dip, and then the draft announcements, and now that's all gone.
And the transfers move so quickly, whereas recruiting is obviously a huge thing, but it's sort of just a constant cycle of hype that only pays off with a couple commitments really in a year. Right. And recruiting is just, this kid's in the portal. 2 weeks later, he's committed to so-and-so. And it's fast enough that it just keeps going, man. Like you're seeing, it's only April 14th. There's going to be a lot more transfers.
I feel like if the NCAA were smart, it would, if you're going to make this legal, which they're going to, right? The one-time transfer deal. Is that official yet?
I think, and then they're voting today or tomorrow or something. Okay. There's the meetings this week.
If you're going to make it legal, lean into it. I saw Goodman's tweet today about the, transfer portal. They're going to come down on coaches who are giving out their logins and stuff like that. Talk about ass backwards. If this is going to be the way it is, then there should be a transparency of information that would allow even more engagement from your fan base. People are going to be hyper interested in this. If you're going to make it a firewall of information, well, it's the same thing that the NCAA always does. It sets up these rules that just almost initiate rule bending or behind the scenes stuff. You know what I mean? Everything's always shady because there's just a lack of transparency. Whereas if you just pull back the curtains and be like, hey, here's the transfer portal. If you want to see who's in there, this is who it is, right?
Yeah, well, it's not like there's secret transfers that are in the portal and not getting reported out. We're talking about the difference between who is the first person to report it or if it comes out in a press release 45 minutes later, right? I don't see.
I guess.
The NCAA doesn't need to run a public transfer portal by any means. It doesn't change anything. You can already go and look up on verbal commits everyone that's in the transfer portal. I guarantee everyone who's in the actual portal is going to be on that site, right? It's not I get that that's because people can access it, but the information gets out, because what good is it being in the portal if no one knows you're in the portal, right? The kids have a need to publicize that. Sure. So I don't see that. Like, it's an idiotic thing for the NCAA to be worried about, but I don't see it like, it's not like there's a lack of information about who's in the portal.
Oh, I agree. But like, if I'm only saying if this is going to, if you're making this part of your off season, essentially, well, then like, if I'm the NCAA, I would say, why is verbal commits going to be the outlet that people are finding this information? I'll just put it on NCAA.com. I mean, yeah, of course you don't want to celebrate it, but why wouldn't you just put it on NCAA.com, right? A kid goes into the portal, they're listed on the list. When they commit to a different school and sign with it, you update that list. Like, that's all it needs to be. That's all I'm saying.
We're talking about an organization that makes it illegal to talk about recruits committed to your school. So what do you really expect here? You think they're gonna like just get with the times here? I don't really see that. I also think I've built a platform for coaches and wrote on the bottom of it that your IP address will be logged, and it was never logged. That's just something you say you're going to do because you're sick of people doing it. So I guarantee it's much more about just a reminder to coaches to not do this than actually something that's ever enforceable. But that's neither here nor there.
Just a waste of time. And someone in Indianapolis sending that to Goodman is pretty adorable. But
yeah, because they're like, quit saying via the portal and just say via source. Fixed. Done.
All right. Well, speaking of player movement, we're on the top here just because we haven't recorded here in a little bit. We'll just run through what's happening at Michigan State. But the crux of this episode is on coaching changes in the Big Ten. It's been 3 changes. There's been, unless I missed it, is Turgeon the only one to get an extension so far? Oh, Fran got one.
Fran, Turgeon.
Did Underwood get one?
Ooh, I'm not sure.
Whatever. We're just going to talk about coaching in the Big Ten and the new guys who are showing up, kind of introduce listeners to who these guys are, what their staffs look like, and we'll grade the hires and all that good stuff. But up top, Dylan, Michigan. You know, I think we talked about after the loss to UCLA and running through potential roster moves, we floated the idea, you know, okay, Shawnee Brown, Mike Smith, Eli Brooks, who decides to stay, or does anyone decide to exercise their additional year of eligibility, I should say, or do they move on? So far, Mike Smith announced he's done. Shawnee Brown announced he's done. Eli Brooks still out there. What are your takeaways there?
Yeah, and a lot of smoke that Eli Brooks is leaning toward returning. We're just waiting on
which I think
an official announcement. We hinted at that in the last podcast.
There you go.
So that's been on the table, and that's why we talked a lot about what next year's team would look like with Eli Brooks potentially.
Right.
Mike Smith and Shawnee Brown, I think it's almost the right decision for everyone involved. They were really in a perfect role this year, both guys, where they could be the best version of themselves, but didn't have to do too much. I think Michigan's bringing in a lot of guys who can do things similar to Shawnee Brown, play off the ball, shoot threes. And if you bring Shawnee Brown back, what does that mean for someone like Caleb Houston, who's coming into that role? I don't know if, like, Mike Smith was really good as a playmaker, but he could be a facilitator because he had Isaiah Livers, Franz Wagner, and Hunter Dickinson next to him. I don't know if you really – both guys would come back with the intention of, I want a bigger role, and I'm not sure if the best version of Michigan gets there by having those players shouldering more of the load on next year's roster, right? So I think it's important to just kind of remember that some shakeup is sometimes healthy for a program, and if you're going to get the most out of the incoming class, which is the best recruiting class in the country, sometimes you need to like make way for them and let them play into those roles. So I think it kind of works out in the end. That's kind of my initial take.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said the last time that I thought Shawnee Brown was the more viable option and probably had a bigger choice because he wasn't a starter, right? He wasn't a guy playing 28, 30 minutes a game, blah, blah. Like, and if he stayed, he probably would take on a larger role. So there would be some enticement there, as opposed to Mike Smith, where it's you get to be the point guard for a younger team. And, like by all accounts, right, last year worked out about as well as humanly possible for Mike Smith. Probably best just to leave good enough alone, right? Call it a win. So, but Shawnee Brown, I did think kind of had a very interesting choice to make. And and he decided to move on. So best of luck to him. With those two gone, I'm really curious about how the dynamic of this next year's, like this team's personality starts to take shape, because they're going to be super young. It's starting to be kind of what we thought it would be, where there's going to be a lot of roster turnover. We're still waiting on Franz to announce something, but it is trending that this is going to be a really young team.
Yeah, and obviously Eli Brooks would really help help that transition, right? You're going to have this, like there's going to be at least 4 freshmen who play in the rotation just because of how many players are on the roster, right? And I think you look in the backcourt, I think Eli Brooks is probably he's really important to help that transition, but I think it's also important to remember what he is and what he isn't. I don't think you can just say, oh, okay, Eli Brooks is back, put him at point guard and put everyone else around him. I still think Eli Brooks is a 2-guard at his best, and I think he's a high, like in an ideal world, you want Eli Brooks to play a lot of minutes, but post a low usage rate, right? Like that's the ideal role for Eli. The problem is everyone around him that you're going to want using offensive possessions in the backcourt is going to be a freshman. And I wonder what you can really expect from a true, like if you're going to rely on true freshmen as your creators in the backcourt, you're going to have some headaches, even no matter how good they are. I mean, Andre Curbelo is going to be a all Big Ten player next year and was incredible as a freshman. And he turned the ball over all the time. And he was able to come off the bench even in that role, right? Like they had another option. If he was going to commit silly fouls or make boneheaded plays, well, they had an All-American that could run the team. That was a pretty nice spot, right?
Right.
So I still lean that adding some kind of ball handler, ball screen creator type transfer to the roster would make a lot of sense for Michigan. But it is a fine line between taking opportunities away from guys like Kobe Buffkin and Frankie Collins, but also having some sort of insurance in case if one of those guys isn't ready to be a big-time player right away, there's not really other options if you want to. Ball screens have been a huge part of both the Juwan Howard's teams. So I lean toward looking to make a move like that in the portal. There's not a ton of great options either, though. So really interesting situation all around. And you don't want to get a reputation of, okay, we're going to recruit all these freshmen and then just recruit over you in the portal either. So you don't want to always have a 1-year point guard, but I don't know. That's a tricky spot where Michigan's roster is at for me right now.
Yeah. And like if Eli is back, right. And you don't get someone in the portal, like I don't think it's a panic situation going in. Right. And you do have a guy, Zeb Jackson, who has a year under his belt, right? And yeah, we haven't seen a lot from him, but he is a guy who's spent a year playing Division I basketball and working with and alongside Eli and Mike Smith. And there is a degree, there's not a void of bodies there. If Eli's gone,
yeah.
I mean, that's like,
then you're
looking at a lot of talent with it's what's bigger, the question marks or the talent?
Yeah. I mean, if Eli's gone, you absolutely need some kind of lead guard or playmaking guard. And even if he's back, I think it's worth the gamble based on how much talent there is in the front court to just go get that guy and figure it out.
Sure.
That's just kind of where I lean with all that. And the other thing is, Michigan, I think Goodman tweeted this out, one of 3 high major schools in the country that haven't lost a transfer yet this season. Mm-hmm. So that's something also to watch. I mean, their season did end late, so I feel like there still could be some kind of attrition. But if you're running everyone back, it's a tricky spot where you're bringing so many players back, but not very many proven rotation players. And it'll be really interesting how that works out.
Yeah, I mean, are you a little surprised we haven't gotten anything from Franz yet?
Slightly, but at the same time,
Aaron Henry
declared this week, and
right.
I assume it's more of a logistics thing and timing thing based on when the season ended and how all that played out. I mean, Franz is going to be a lottery pick. I think it'd be crazy to do anything other than go to the draft. So it's odd, I guess, but we're still 2.5 weeks from when the season ended. So I think when you go a week later than most other teams, it does play into those. Like, how many has Jalen Suggs declared for the NBA draft yet? I don't think so. Not officially.
Yeah. So a lot to happen there, and we will have full episode, right? Break it down.
I think we should do big team specific ones, but we need to talk about Michigan State because
let's get into Michigan State.
There's been more movement, and we were in the midst of postseason stuff.
So, okay, let's make sure we're checking all these boxes, right? So Thomas Kithier, Rocket Watts, and Jack Hoiberg, for what it's worth, all in the transfer portal as of today, Wednesday, April 14th. Josh Langford has made it pretty clear he will not be back.
Going live on the Players Trunk this week.
I saw that. Aaron Henry declared for the draft with saying he will not be back. So, yeah.
And Tyson Walker coming in,
correct. And joining a class of Pierre Brooks, Max Christie, Jaden Akins. What your early takes here? Let's get into. First of all, I think it's worth saying, might not be done here in the portal of guys going in and coming out.
Yeah. So even so Michigan State's at 12 without Kithier. Is that right? I believe.
That seems right. Hold on. Let me double check this.
My initial take when I look at Michigan State's roster is...
And Amani.
I like a lot of the incoming players a lot more than the returning players. You're looking at a situation where over under 3 starters from probably over under 2.5 starters that weren't on the team last year. Does that sound right?
I think that's right. Yes.
And so I think that's really good. And I think it's also, I'm just not sure where you pencil in the rest of the pieces. And I look at this roster, and if I'm Michigan State, I would still try to go out and get a big man who I trust can play 25 minutes. I know that the roster is loaded with bigs, but if you only are comfortable playing any of them for 15 minutes, I think I would still add one, even if you lose another one. That's kind of where I look at filling the gaps with what you have. You've upgraded the talent in the backcourt. It's obviously going to be young, and obviously you lose Aaron Henry, but the lead guard spot is much better. Akins and Walker is going to be better than Lawyer and Hogard, right? So that's my initial read. Where are you at with this roster?
Definitely agree on adding a big, a guy who is reliable defending ball screens, a guy who can finish at the basket. You need that. And it's, I don't know. I mean, I think there is still right now, just the same question at the 5 as there was last year. Right.
That's what I think. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously guys can get better, but I still don't know who I'm trusting in that group of players at the 5.
And I like Tyson Walker a lot, his film, all that stuff. But we say it and say it and say it. Just automatically projecting up transfers to be a thing is kind of a fool's errand, I think. In reality, we have no idea how good Tyson Walker's going to be. I think you can make the case to add another guard and another big, in terms of like a actual ball handler, a guy who can play out of ball screens, a guy who gives you maybe some shooting. Like I think you still have space for more, because I look at it and I still see question marks. Like Jaden Akins did not play lead guard this year, right? He played at Ipsy Prep, and that was what it was. Well, and then he went to Sunrise, and
he played really well at Sunrise.
Yeah, but he was also behind a true point. They had a true point guard who's one of the best in the country, if not the best in the country. So he wasn't their primary ball handler.
Yes, I agree.
Is my point. So, there's still questions there. There's a lot of eggs in the Tyson Walker basket right now. That's not a bad thing.
I'm going to go out and say I really like what Tyson Walker can bring. I think my only worry is that he's pretty small and slender as far as the Big Ten goes. But I think you look at Mike Smith, he was small. He wasn't slender, but he was short, and he was able to get by. And I think Tyson Walker's much better. It's a big upgrade at point guard, even if he's an up transfer.
No doubt. No doubt it's an upgrade in the fact that he is a high major Division I point guard, and Michigan State did not have that this year, right? So he doesn't necessarily need to be all league, but he'll be an upgrade regardless. I agree with you wholly on that. But you also know that you can't just say Mike Smith was small, Tyson Walker
I agree.
was small. It just doesn't work that way. And
it's a similar
just the numbers spell out, on average, these things are a bit of a crapshoot. So all I'm saying is I 1,000% agree you have to bring in another big, but I would also bring in another guard.
So it's a similar thing for me in that, when you have an up transfer, if you're asking him to be your best player, you're in trouble. If you're asking him to play a role, you're in a good spot. And I do think, Pierre Brooks coming off a really good season. Jaden Akins is a really good player and he's going to be a really good defender. He played really well at Sunrise, despite the fact that Kennedy Chandler was on that team. That is what it is. That's what you get when you go to a school like that. And I would say it's different than a situation like Zeb Jackson, where he never played. Jaden Akins was a big part of that team, and they were really good. Max Christie, really good. So I think those guys will play. But again, they're freshmen, and we just talked about how much you want freshmen to be able to play a role, not star. So you have all those guys, and then how do you kind of bring it all together is going to be the question. It's going to be a lot of getting the pieces to fit. And you have a lot, there's not okay, well, we have this guy who we can pencil in as a starting place. The upperclassmen and older players on the roster are all sort of up in the air too.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's a great point, that if you're asking an up transfer to be your best player, you're in a little bit of trouble. And when I look at this Michigan State team, I see a little bit of that. I feel like you're kind of asking Tyson Walker to be your best player right now, right? Him or Joey Hauser? No?
Oh, Joey Hauser.
Who's the best player on Michigan State next year?
It's going to be, I think it's going to come down to the freshman class. And
well, then you're in even more trouble, because how many are Big Ten freshmen are the best player on their teams, on good teams in this league?
How many McDonald's All-Americans come in the Big Ten? Max Christie's going to be really good.
I love Max Christie's game. Absolutely.
And I think you can start to see a fit for all the pieces, though, right? Last year's Michigan State roster never really fit. Now you have a quick, small point guard who can pass and create. You have Joey Hauser, who can play off of a pick and roll point guard in a way that Michigan State never really could last year. You have Max Christie, who can play on the wing off the pick and roll and make threes. So that all fits together nicely, right? In a way that I don't think you have. I think you need a big, though. John Harrar. He'd be a great fit for Michigan or Michigan State's roster.
Agree.
Probably better opportunity at Michigan State to play more minutes, but add him, and all of a sudden, like, it all starts to fit together for me a little bit. So I don't know. I like having, like, Pierre Brooks, Jaden Akins, they're going to play and they're going to be impact players. So that's a good starting point where I'm at with this team. What does that look like? Is that a top whatever team? I mean, it's way too early to say.
Right.
I guess the problem is if you're bringing someone in, if you're going to bring in a shooter, what does that mean for Gabe Brown, right? Like, Gabe Brown should be that shooter.
Mm-hmm.
But you have guys who should fill roles that you'd want to fill. And that makes it hard to bring in another perimeter player, in my opinion.
Yeah. I just think there's going to be plenty more movement here. I do.
Yeah, I mean,
that's based solely on opinion. This is not like I've been very busy with golf, frankly. So I have no idea. No, I'm kidding. I just seeing like the writing on the wall here is there needs to be a little bit more, and there's probably some more shoes to drop.
Yep, I can see that.
Early, and like everyone, like our expectation of projecting lineups, and like I see stories popping up of like breaking down, potential rotations and all this shit. I'm like, I mean, you might as well be throwing darts at a bare wall. Like, we don't know shit until like August anymore, right?
Look, if you're on a message board, you got to drop some rotation predictions in April, late April, early May, mid-May. It keeps the offseason going.
I need to get up on your message board.
I mean, you'll see all sorts of lineup projections.
The only time I hear about your message board is when you tell me that there is personal attacks on me.
Well, you got to watch your six. I do think Michigan State deserves credit. Like, Tyson Walker, go out and get a guy you really like early in the portal, I think is a great move. Sure. Reminds me of Mike Smith, not because they're both small, but because they found someone they like, got him early before kind of everything went into full silly season in the portal, and got the job done. I think that'll be a good ad. And I feel like Michigan State's done a pretty good job with transfers when they've come over, even up transfers. Although, like, it's not been a big part of the approach, but like, I think he'll fit.
Yeah. I mean, and a guy that he'll be, the better the talent is around him, the better he'll be, because he's not he is a prototypical scoring and passing point guard. So give him guys that can actually shoot the ball around him and score, right? And he'll be better, but that's still a question mark.
All right. We've got breaking news mid-pod.
Oh, baby.
Brad Davison's decision is in.
No.
There's no place I'd rather be than Madison. I'm grateful for one last ride with my coaches and teammates this upcoming season. Just what the league needed, huh? I would not want to go any other way than playing in front of Badger Nation at the Kohl Center. He's back.
I am speechless. How old is he?
He's not young. He's younger than Trice, I think, though, right? But so he's the only guy coming back on that team, right? Everyone else left. Whew. Brad Davison, back in the Big Ten. He's only 20. He's actually young. He's not even 22 yet.
Oh, wow.
So that makes a little sense, I guess. He shot 27.5% on 2-point field goals.
Twos, folks. That was twos for the record. Did he make more 2-point field goals or draw more offensive fouls?
I mean, in the Big Ten, it's probably close. He only made 16 twos in the Big Ten.
I would bet he's close to that many charges drawn.
I think flagrants plus charges drawn are greater than 2-point makes.
Agree.
That's the Davison equilibrium.
You know what, though? It's good for the league, though, because it's at least a talking point. It's fun. It's great for the pod, most importantly.
It will be good. And
good fun.
We lost Reavers, but we'll take one more year at Brad Davison.
We need a Davidson nickname, I think, for his final run. So
we're going to do a Twitter brainstorm or something. That might get ugly quick.
That would get really bad. I don't think.
Skip that. We don't need that.
Maybe if he were a pro, we could do that. But I don't know if that would be appropriate for a college student. But either way, the buzz cut, something. We got to come up with something. All right. You ready to get into coaching?
Coaching search. Where do you want to start?
It's a lot easier to make fun of coaches than players. So, all right. So 3 new coaches coming to the Big Ten. Mike Woodson heading to Indiana, Micah Shrewsberry heading to Penn State, and Ben Johnson heading to Minnesota. You want us to go one by one through these?
Yeah. Let's get it. Where are we going first?
Let's obviously start with Indiana. A lot of ways to take this one because there's so many layers here. You have the search itself, which was just phenomenal in its drama and total nonsense and media infighting. Oh, just delicious. And then you have the dynamics of the hire itself, right? You know, what Mike Woodson's going to be at Indiana and the makeup of his staff. And then you have the Indiana basketball dynamic of it's kind of leaning into its history here, but it's also leaning into, you know, let's modernize things with maybe some NBA elements and things like that. An interesting dynamic there. Like, where do you want to take this?
Let's start with the media part and the search.
Oh, that was the right answer. It was so good.
So first of all, there was a narrative that it was like premature to fire Archie Miller. He lost his last 6 games of the year and missed the tournament again. I mean, that team was good enough to win, to not lose the last 6 games of the year. It was going nowhere.
But there's things to unpack even there. Like, that narrative came about not right after Archie was fired, but like 2 weeks into it when the whole team was in the transfer portal and every other thing was popping up, right? They approached Holtman and it didn't go through, and they approached Matta, and, you know, this insane story about him failing a physical, which I think was disproven pretty solidly. So it got onto this like piling on thing that you see with programs like Indiana basketball. It's so easy when like a place like that, when things go wrong with that fan base that is as self-important as it is, when like things go awry, people just pile on. It becomes a running joke. I think people kind of lose themselves a little bit in the moment. And that's how those narratives become almost mainstream, right?
Yeah. And I also think that there's a segment of media who liked Archie Miller, who wanted to poke fun when other coaches, the joke was that you couldn't get a coach as good as Archie Miller, and that was just ridiculous. So
ridiculous.
Anyone just about is a better coach than Archie Miller for that, given the state of the program up to that point, right? Like, at a certain point, you can't dig out from that. And it doesn't matter if every player went in the portal. You needed to move on from Archie Miller. And some of those takes about, is it worth losing your whole roster? Well, look, newsflash, people can come back from the portal.
And that team sucked.
And the team sucked. The celebrations are, we're just going all over the place here, but the celebrations with all these guys coming back when they went 12-15 is a whole nother element of this that's kind of funny.
That was part of it too. Like it went from players leave program that wasn't very good, right? National media uses that as a punching bag to make fun of the ongoing search that hadn't landed a marquee coach yet, right? Those players then return, and certain segments use that as a flex to celebrate the hiring of a coach who was probably, I'm pulling it out of my ass, but 3rd, 4th, 5th on the actual people who were offered the job. All kinds of ways to spin this thing. But when there was that real sweet spot there for about 7 days where you had a large portion of IU's media fighting with the national media, and then you had segments within the IU media fighting at each other, especially when like the Thad Matta thing went down, or like there was columns coming out and there was other reporting, and it was just, phenomenal.
half the people that listen to this podcast should be very familiar with the dynamics at play based on anything that happens with Michigan football.
So good. It was very much a get your popcorn ready moment, and I know I enjoyed every bit of it. And just having seen it at Michigan, like when these things play out, it's just the drama and the questioning of who's the real source and who has the real information, and it's just comedy gold.
I kind of am optimistically in on Mike Woodson, Indiana head coach.
I'm going to co-sign on that.
I think that I think Indiana, I like what they've done to build a staff around him.
Yeah.
But I think that there's some real merit to the fact that like NBA coaches are pretty smart basketball minds. And I think there are some college coaches that maybe aren't quite that smart. And I think that what you can learn from the NBA, and by all accounts, Mike Woodson was a fairly successful NBA coach. People were impressed with you're as good as your players in the NBA, but I think the results were solid. I think what they ran was considered pretty good offensively. And I like the idea of modern NBA offenses in the Big Ten. I think Juwan Howard has shown that you can run NBA stuff and it can work in college. You can run it with I think there was a narrative when Juwan came in about it's hard to run NBA offense without NBA players. And I don't think that's really true. Like you've seen Xavier Simpson, Hunter Dickinson, Eli Brooks, Mike Smith, all levels of player. Like these guys aren't all pros, and they've been successful running those kind of actions. I'm intrigued, especially because the offense was just so horrific at Indiana under Archie. I like it more than maybe the overall perception is.
I mean, I think between his basketball mind, his experience, the guys he's coached, the credibility that he has, also his disposition, right? Like there's a shift right now in how you coach college players, and the ranting, raving, disciplinarian stuff, it still is going to work in some portions of the world. Like Tom Izzo's system at Michigan State, anyone that signs on to that knows what they're getting, and that's going to last until he's done, right? But overall, it's going to be this dealing with college players as if they're pros and speaking to them that way, right? And kind of carrying on this, real relationships, and not to say that being a disciplinarian is not a way that you can harbor a real relationship, but hey man, I just don't think that stuff's going to really work anymore. And Mike Woodson, you could tell the way that he spoke at his introductory press conference, the way that he came off there, I think he's going to be one of those guys who deals with his players in a way that they respond to now.
And I think the way Indiana's season ended, and I think those players will welcome that change. There are multiple blow-ups on the bench where Archie was getting after players and everything else. So I think that transition will probably go over well too, right? So I don't know that I really love the pieces on this roster, even if they're coming back, but I am intrigued. I get there's so much talk about Indiana as a school and is it actually a good job, and that all those takes. And I really do think if you have any semblance of success at Indiana, you're going to get dudes. And I'm not really worried about that. I don't think it's as nationally irrelevant as people wanted to portray. So basketball is a huge deal in Indiana. The best players in Indiana still like Indiana. It's not like it's a completely dead brand. So I think the recruiting element of things will probably work itself out. Bring in good assistants, you'll get good players. I'm not that worried about that. I'm excited to see what they look like on the court. They're talking about playing more 4 out and everything else. Then they bring back some players who aren't really suited for that, right? What does Trace Jackson Davis look like shooting jumpers? I guess we'll find out. I mean, it makes sense to find out. It's crazy that he hasn't shot from outside of 8 feet more than 3 or 4 times a season when the shot clock's running down. So I'm excited about it. But it's really hard to say.
Yeah, and it'll be I guess from my understanding, Woodson's basically going to coach the offense. Like, it's going to be his offense, which I think the Dane Fife element is pretty intriguing to me because, he primarily coached offense at Michigan State. So now I guess he'll be kind of aiding in Woodson's coaching of offense, I assume, right? And, obviously that and coach and recruiting the state and things like that, and kind of being, right, very much a bridge to kind of Indiana history, and also potentially, is he the head coach in waiting there? I have no idea. But getting Dane, who doesn't really have a relationship with Mike Woodson, is really, really intriguing in terms of what his role is going to be. And I guess they retained Kenya Hunter, right? Who was previously assistant. And I think that's part of the reason that they were able to retain as many of the guys off the previous roster.
And land Pitt transfer Xavier Johnson. Correct.
I think he has a long-term relationship with him, right?
Yeah, he recruited him out of, I believe, I think he was at Nebraska back in the day when he was recruiting him. And so that was a pre-existing relationship that came together, and they brought him in. I think he's a bit of a wild card, can be a little inconsistent. This is talking about Johnson, who is
you're not breaking down
Kenya
Hunter's coaching.
No. But I think Johnson's a bit emotional and maybe needs to rein things in a bit. And it'll be that's an interesting challenge for a first-year college coach to work through, and how you integrate a piece like that as a transfer. So that'll be interesting to see.
But also one of those deals where you hope a guy with that NBA experience, like, he connects with the kid who maybe has, right, a disposition like that, where maybe he gets through to it, right? Mike Woodson's a 60-year-old man who's been in the NBA for 20 whatever years, right? Like,
probably seen some shit.
Exactly. So I assume that he can communicate with a player a little bit different than your average climb the ladder college coach. And that's what you sign up for with a deal like this. And that's why one of the reasons I agree with you on being overly, positive when it comes to Indiana's hire of Woodson. I guess the third assistant's going to probably be, I don't think it's official yet, but Yazir Roseman. Am I pronouncing his last name correct? I don't know. I think he was previously at Alabama. He was actually there during the internal investigation in 2018. He might have a little stink on him, but I think that's where that's going. So, yeah, what do you think, though, about this idea of, Indiana for so long has kind of been in this weird spot of, do you lean into your history? Do you move on from your history? Right? You kind of have this shade, this cloud, whatever, positive or negative, of Bob Knight, and you bring in Mike Woodson, who was on, right, his early teams, a 2,000-point career scorer at IU. It's part of the history, but it's also a different look because of his NBA experience, because of all this stuff. Like, how do you kind of view the, I guess, overarching position that Indiana finds itself in, brand-wise and all that?
I mean, I don't really – that stuff's all kind of nonsense in my opinion, as far as, like, do you lean into it or not? But it's, in a way, it's similar to Juwan Howard, right? Like, if you're going to say the Fab Five was this controversial period where you don't really want to – you haven't really publicly leaned into it a lot because of sanctions or whatever, but then Juwan Howard comes from this NBA background, and then you just kind of bring it all together and you can kind of consolidate everything as, oh, this is Michigan basketball history. I think the same thing kind of fits with Indiana, right? Like, it's not perfect. There's been different waves of it along the way. Like, I don't know. Like, I just think it kind of works and brings everything together. I don't think you have to not lean into your history because of Bob Knight. That seems like overkill to me. I think it just move on. I mean, I don't know. I don't see it as a big issue.
I mean, I don't think you can say it's nonsense when it's something that the fan base obsesses over and that every athletic director there has to deal with, right? And
so isn't it a good way to deal with that then?
I agree. I think it's the right play. I think it's the right play. And you can make a case they've tried to separate from it, right? And get Tom Crean. What was his Indiana connection? Was there any? I don't remember.
No,
Nothing that jumps to my mind. Archie Miller, nothing really there. Like, I think it's the right play. Like, Indiana, be what you are, right? Like, this is what you are, man. And there's a way to kind of still tie yourself to what you were and do things a little bit differently and modernize stuff. I feel like this is I feel like this is a good, healthy balance of those two things.
Yeah, I think you better be hiring Mike Woodson because you think he's a good coach, not because he can like tie your history together, right? Like you should have hired Archie Miller because you thought he was a good coach, or Tom Crean, or any, like, that's what you should be looking at. The fact that it's not like, I don't look at it similar, like UNC, like sticking with Hubert Davis, like because he's like in the family, like, and was there, like that's a little bit of a different situation where Mike Woodson's credentials kind of stand on his own, and he's been a good NBA coach. I think you're seeing, we'll find out if he's a good college coach, and that's a risk, but I think that there's enough there to take a gamble on it compared to, say, like, I don't know who else Indiana was going to hire, right? Like,
that's the thing. And like, of the alumni, right? Like, let's put it this way. If Mike Woodson is an Indiana alumni, he's not even in this conversation.
Fair.
Right. So alumni wise, he was the best candidate of any potential, right? So if you want to say Dane, Calbert Chaney, whoever, Mike Woodson has the best resume for this job. So like, that's why he got the job, right? They went all in. They threw everything they could at Brad Stevens, didn't get him, right? I think they kicked the tires on the possibility of, this is my understanding of how this all went down, kicked the tires on Thad Matta about the potential of him being a head coach. And that was proven to not be feasible, right? So got him on board in this kind of conciliary, top advisor, whatever you want to call it, role, right? Brought him in on that. And I think there was some communication between Chris Holtmann and IU.
Chris Holtmann, hell of an agent. I feel like my man gets his name floated with every.
But at the same time, like, the idea that Indiana had no contact with him and that this whole thing was cooked up by Holtmann, the odds of those two things being true, slim. The odds that the truth is somewhere in the middle, highly likely.
My point is, there are probably other people they talked to.
I know of I was told of another Big Ten coach that reached out trying to get the job and was slapped back. So yeah, I mean, these things happen all the time, but I like the dynamics of Mike Woodson, Thad in his role. Like, listen, if your brain trust of your program is Mike Woodson, Thad Matta, and Larry Brown, that's a lot of basketball knowledge right there, man. Like, you can do a lot worse than that. And I know a lot of people are kind of skeeved out by the Larry Brown thing.
Larry Brown, that's not happening. Is that true?
I thought that was still in play of him not like as an assistant coach or anything overly formal, but I think he's going to be involved in a way. No?
I saw a headline that he's not joining his staff officially, even in an off-court advisory role.
I don't know if it could be correct.
Woodson told Rothstein on Monday on his podcast that half of that reporting was true. He constantly talks with Brown, but will not be bringing him to Indiana.
Okay. I have a feeling Larry Brown is still going to have his voice a little bit in the program.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. Larry Brown's one of the best basketball minds that you can find out there. Put aside everything else. Put aside the history, NCAA shit, whatever. Like, I think he's untouchable in terms of any kind of formal position. And that Mike Woodson, if it were up to him, would probably have Larry Brown on his actual staff. And I'm pretty sure if I had to guess, I'll say that it came down from up top at IU. You're not bringing on a known cheater and having him have a title within the program. Okay.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which is different than actually bringing him on with a title.
Right.
So I think that's worth clarifying.
But point remains, if there's conversations going on and it's Mike Woodson, Larry Brown, Thad Matta, Dane Fife, Kenya Hunter, there's a lot of, there's institutional knowledge, there's basketball knowledge. Like, it's a pretty good setup, I think, all things considered, when the search was, I think, publicly seen to be as big of a quote unquote like shit show as it was perceived to be, which Probably was never. Was it ideal? No. Was it as bad as some made it out to be? Also no.
What coaching search hasn't been portrayed as a shit show, though? Like, it kind of just comes with the territory, I feel like, especially in a high-profile stage.
The higher the profile, the bigger the portrayal, right?
No one pays not attention, a shit show.
Right? No one pays attention to Penn State's coaching search, so even if that were a shit show, no one would care enough to just call it that.
And if a coaching search isn't a shit show like UNC, everyone's like, well, maybe they should have done more and looked at other people, right? Like you're always gonna, the month after a coaching search, all you can do is poke holes and say what could have been differently when we really have no idea and we have to see how it plays out. Do you think Indiana is going to be any good this year? Like, I don't really know what to make of the roster.
I mean, with Trace Jackson Davis back, they need to be an NCAA tournament team. Period. Right?
Well, Trace Jackson Davis is going to be a junior and has never played in the NCAA tournament. So I don't know that you can completely say that. It's not like he's Jared Sullinger.
Well, they would have been there last year, right?
Ish. I mean, they weren't really. They weren't quite. They were headed the wrong direction down the stretch. I don't know.
What were they projected on Ken Palm? They were projected to be an NCAA tournament team.
A 10 seed. 10 seed. They played on Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament. They were on the edge.
Hey, it would have been in the end. He would have played an NCAA tournament game last year. Is my own
maybe.
Point. I will say Indiana's in the NCAA tournament next year. Okay. What about you?
I'll say no. I'll say they're far more enjoyable to watch.
But that's not saying anything.
Tournament.
Oh, you're going to get some heat. I love it. All right.
Okay.
We're going to talk about Penn State or Minnesota.
Let's go to Penn State.
Okay. Micah Shrewsberry heading to Happy Valley. In my opinion, this is the best hire of the three in the league. I think it's one of the best hires nationally in the country. To the extent that I think Penn State so far outkicked their coverage in terms of getting a guy that I think Micah Shrewsberry could have gotten so many better jobs than Penn State. Like, I think Micah Shrewsberry would have been an amazing hire for Minnesota, which is a way better job than Penn State. I mean, his history speaks for itself. So real quick, played high school ball at Cathedral High in Indianapolis, was a D3 basketball player, then climbed all the way up. He was a Dobo under Brad Stevens at Butler, climbed to being an assistant. This guy coached in back-to-back national championship games. So, like, how many guys in the Big Ten coached in any national championship games, let alone two? I think the only other one would be Mike Garland, who was on the staff at MSU in both 2000 and 2009. Juwan Howard played in two national championship games. But beyond that, it's hard to even find anyone who coached in one national championship game. You got Sadi, did so in 2018. And Stevens at MSU was on the staff in 2009. So you can go through every other staff in the conference. I'm not sure if you're finding much more than that. Then he went to Purdue for 2 years. Then he went with Stevens to the Celtics for 5 years. He coached in 2 Eastern Conference championship series.
You angling for it to be his agent here, man. You got the whole resume ready to go.
Then associate head coach at Purdue for 2 years. The last 2 years he had offensive coordinator role, which I think is kind of weird because I think of it as Matt Painter's offense, but
I feel like they
upgraded things and changed things.
Yeah, that Painter's offense has kind of risen and fallen with who's his offensive coordinator. I feel like that's definitely a narrative that's been out there about Purdue over the years.
I know Dana wrote something to that extent on this idea of coordinators at Purdue. But look, like I said, I think Shrewsberry could have gotten a much better job than Penn State. So for Penn State to get him, I thought was a major get. The biggest question I have with him at Penn State is not if he will win or not if he will do well, but how long they can reasonably expect to keep him there.
So here's my one concern. I think he's probably an awesome coach. It is that the right, like, is a great raw coach, right? Like X's and O's coach with all this experience, is that the right fit to win at Penn State when you're going into a season without basically the whole roster is gone to the transfer portal? Like, is Penn State a job you win with coaching or you win with recruiting? And
no one who's recruiting to Penn State.
I mean, Penn State has got guys like better. Like Penn State gets like Northwestern, you win with coaching, right? Like Northwestern always hires kind of a coachy coach. Penn State's usually had coach that can get guys. I guess you could probably say DeChellis was the opposite in a way. Like he was more of a.
I think you need coaching and identifying talent. And hey, if you take a swing and can get a kid, but the way for Penn State, I think, is coaching and identifying pieces, whether it's out of the portal or recruiting, and having a good recruiting plan, right? Like Chambers leaning on Philly, I always thought was the wrong play. I think you need to be more Midwest based, get kids who care about playing in the Big Ten in terms of recruiting high school kids, right? And he's that, right? He's going to have a recruiting base in Indiana and in the Midwest. And then he brought in a guy like Mike Farley, right? Who's old hoop group guy, coached in New York. He's a Philly guy. Like he'll be able to, he'll have your connections out east to be able to get some kids here and there.
Okay. My larger point was just like, he seems like a perfect guy to bring into a program that already wins, like a Xavier or a Dayton or a program like that. Or a Butler or whatever, right? Like, that already kind of has an established culture because he's already a really good coach. I just wonder, and he very well could be, but like he hasn't even coached really he's been a piece of good programs more than like a bottom up, like rebuild a program. Right. So sure. That's kind of my one question with him, as far as not him as a coach, but how successful he is early on at Penn State.
That's fair. I also feel like the fact that, his two trees, the places that he will be looking to replicate are Butler under Brad Stevens and Purdue under Matt Painter. And you want to talk about like an actual program, right? Like those are two pretty good places to replicate. So I just want to run through his staff here a little bit. So I mentioned Mike Farley. He was at Hofstra for like 6 or 7 years, was the associate head coach under Joe Mihalik. He got bumped up to interim head coach this past year when Mihalik had to step away for health reasons. I've known Mike forever. He's a St. Joe's guy, was there a little bit before me. So he was a walk-on under Martelli at St. Joe's. And like I said, was part of the hoop group out in PA and has just a million recruiting connections back there. A lot of people thought he was going to get the Hofstra head job this year. And then Speedy Claxton made a play for it. And, Hofstra went with the famous NBA alum route, which is where everyone seems to be going now. So Mike kind of got bumped, now find himself at Penn State. I think he's a good hire there. Associate head coach is going to be Adam Fisher. He spent the last 8 years at Miami under Larinaga. Penn State guy, had stops at Villanova, BU, and a stint at Penn State. This dude, he's from Jameson, Pennsylvania, but it's not spelled Jameson, which would be pretty sweet. It's Jami, like Antoine Jameson. Third assistant is Aki Collins, who was a former assistant at Memphis under Passner and Marquette under Wojo. Spent the last few years as a scout with the Thunder and then was the Dobo at New Mexico. He and Shrewsberry worked together at Marshall under Ron Jersa back in the day. So that's
no shout out for Taylor Battle on the staff.
Is he on the staff?
Yeah, assistant to the head coach.
Assistant to the head coach. I think they were thinking that he was going to get an assistant job, I imagine.
All-time Big Ten bucket.
Dude, a certified dude. And Brian Snow, right? Is that official yet? I don't know.
I don't know if that. I believe so, but I'm not sure. Right. I don't know.
Ignore that if that's not official yet.
I don't know, like, how many years is this rebuild? Like the whole roster's gone.
What's the idea of a rebuild anymore in the modern version of college basketball with the portal, though?
Well, are they getting dudes in the portal? Like the portal's moving, and I don't see anyone on Penn State's roster. I'm a little worried about like, do you worry that this program somehow falls like down? Like they were close, right? Like they were competitive these last few years. They were like a top 50 type Ken Pom team, even when they weren't all that good.
A million close losses. Like this wasn't the Penn State of old getting blown out by 10, 15, 20, 25 every night. Like they had a lot of close games that things could have gone differently. I totally agree. They were really close.
But they're going to fall. Like they're not going to be better next year than they were this year. And I think teams at the bottom of the league are going to keep getting better. I mean, I'm not really ever high on Northwestern, but Nebraska's going to keep getting better. Minnesota, who knows where they go, but it's going to be hard to climb out of that bottom four. And I don't see it happening overnight. So it's going to be really interesting. Like, is it a situation where you kind of blow it all up and are really bad this year? Or are they able to scrape by and win a few games? I don't know. It's going to be, I don't see it really. I think we're going to have to talk about what Micah Shrewsberry looks like 3 years from now, more than in the near term. Well,
that kind of goes to my previous point where like my biggest question on Shrewsberry is I think he's going to do well. I think he has the resume and the pedigree to have Penn State being competitive. And if Penn State is even competitive, I feel like he's going to get job offers. You know what that's my biggest question, that like, it's not even a matter of building Penn State into an NCAA tournament team. I feel like if he has Penn State close to an NCAA tournament team, he's going to get offers that are better than Penn State.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
If I was advising him, man, I would worry about taking this job.
I don't get why he took it. That's why I think it was a great get for Penn State.
That's what I'm worried about. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't see it as a job that's going to get you job offers if you want a new job in 2 years.
I think he can win just given his resume and the names like Brad Stevens and Matt Painter that are connected to him. I feel like if he wins 18 games in back-to-back years at Penn State, he's going to get offers, right? Like, look, we both like LaVall Jordan, right? But like things at Butler are not exactly like going smashingly well. And
if you wanted the Butler job, I would have kept my ass on the bench at Purdue. I wouldn't have.
I agree 1,000% with you. I agree 1,000%. But if I'm Penn State, like you need to have that realization that even if he wins 16 games next year, right? And takes Penn State from going 10-13 to 16-15, he's still just as viable as a candidate for Butler. And Butler's a better job than Penn State, so he'll go, I would think.
Yeah, maybe. I just don't think it. I'm worried about it from his personal perspective because I don't think it's
if I'm his agent, I tell him, listen, there's a really good chance next year at Penn State you go 6-20 or 6 whatever. Let's hope everyone plays 30 whatever games next year. So there's a chance at Penn State next year you win only 6 games and say Butler opens or say Xavier opens or say whatever, are you going to still be in position that you are right now to get that job? I agree with you. It's a risk for sure on his end. For Penn State, it's a no-brainer. If you can get this guy to take this job.
Yeah, definitely a good hire by Penn State. I just don't think it's going to lead to wins immediately. I think it's going to be a bit of a process, and that's probably the healthy way to go too. Like, I think you need to get some guys and build up your program that way. So it'll be interesting. I want to flip over to Minnesota to wrap this up.
Yes.
This one is probably the opposite, where I'm not quite sure about Ben Johnson as a head coach, but probably a right move to take the job. It's a hell of a gig to land from a guy that I wasn't really on the radar anywhere for other head coaching gigs, as far as I know.
I mean, I thought for a good hour that it was Ben Jacobson that they hired. Not Ben Johnson, because frankly, I didn't really know who Ben Johnson was. So
if you can stick to the Richard Pitino coaching tree, you got to do it.
You got to lean right on into that thing, man. No doubt. And the Tim Miles coaching tree. Don't forget, spent a year under Tim at Nebraska back in like 13 or something like that. Yeah, I mean, rarely do you see a guy who was an assistant to a coach who's kind of on the hot seat a little bit, which is I think is how we would probably both classify Travis Steele at Xavier right now. Look, they went 23-26 at Xavier in the last 3 years in the Big East. That's not to Xavier's standard at all. So things are getting a little dicey for Travis Steele at Xavier, and his assistant coach just got the head job at Minnesota, which is, what's a better job, Xavier or Minnesota?
I mean, I think Xavier before this had that built-in pedigree of a great job to elevate your stock, right? They make the tournament every year. They're like, you have to really battle at Minnesota. Like, there's opportunity to be good at Minnesota, but I think for a while, Xavier is one of those jobs where you just looked at it as such a successful program that it'll kind of make you look good as a coach. So I don't know. I mean, I do think Minnesota has a lot of potential as a job.
I love that job. Yes.
And I think it's just going to come down to, can he get dudes? Like, the state of Minnesota is producing talent. So I do think there's some credence to, okay, let's get a guy who has ties to the state and can recruit the state. I used to think that was always a big thing for Michigan when hiring coaches, right? Like, that was kind of the knock on Beeline, right? He's not going to be able to recruit the state, but you're recruiting against Michigan State, which is already such a dominant program. Minnesota, you don't have that, right? So if you do foster those relationships, I think you should be able to get local players to an extent. So I'm intrigued by that, but I mean, he's just not very proven. I don't know enough about what they'll look like on the court. I'm not going to say that I'm going to buy his stock on his coaching ability because he coached for Steele, Patino, and Tim Miles. Like,
right.
It's not like those guys are Brad Stevens and Matt Painter.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the comfortable hire, I feel like, for Minnesota. Right. He graduated in 2005. I think he's credited kind of with recruiting
Amir Coffey, right?
Amir Coffey, Daniel Oturu, I think Jordan Murphy. So, can he get guys? Yeah, that's a question. His contract speaks to this hire. He's being paid $1.95 million a year. Of the known contracts in the league, he's the lowest paid coach in the conference, right? Northwestern doesn't make theirs public, but Chris Collins is making over $2 million for sure. Penn State, which I don't think is public, I don't know what they're paying Shrewsberry, but they've always historically been the lowest in the league. Pat Chambers was the lowest paid coach in the league forever. So this hire, it's Minnesota and Penn State are paying their coaches probably the least in the league. And I don't know what Shrewsberry got, but $1.95 million. And they said when they brought him in, they said, well, he's going to be like the lowest paid coach in the league, but we're going to heavily invest in his staff. Well, look, I mean, they hired Dave Thornton, who's like a legendary old high school coach in Minnesota, and his college stops were Colorado State and Drake. And then they bring in Jason Kemp, who, I think he was a
mid-major
assistant for years, right? North Dakota State and Toledo and Ohio. The name that I was given for their likely third assistant is Jamie McNeely from Texas A&M. I don't think that's official yet, but I think that's the name I was told is the likely third assistant. But it's not like, point being, they didn't bring in.
Indiana is what you call investing in your assistant coaching staff.
Juwan Howard coming into Michigan, right? You bring in a guy who was a 20-year head coach at a mid-major. You retain a high-profile coach from the previous staff, and you bring in an NBA assistant coach. Like, that's investing in the staff. This does not look like investing in the staff to me. And I'm kind of stuck on this hire of, am I crazy, or could Minnesota have hired Brian Dutcher and brought in Ben Johnson as his associate head coach and coach in waiting?
I guess they have to have, like, I just wonder if they tried that. Like, I don't know.
I don't know. Right. And I don't know that either.
Because even Dutcher had a lower buyout, I believe,
for
Minnesota, right? So I don't know. I mean, it makes too much sense on paper to have not at least been talked about, but who knows?
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what I look like, and that would seem to be a lot more. I mean, Dutcher has a track record of so much success at San Diego State. They run a unique system on both ends like that. I could get really on board with that and actually see that working at a school like Minnesota, where having an identity as a program to just like recruit a lot of length, like that would be something that I'd really like for the Big Ten. I just have no idea what to expect from Johnson and how they're going to play. And they're losing Marcus Carr to the portal. They're losing Liam Robbins. Mm-hmm. Liam Robbins just goes wherever his uncle goes. That's a move. I mean, I don't know. Like last year, it was they lost Gabe Kalsher to Iowa State. And last year, the team was just Marcus Carr and no one else, and now it's just no one else. So I don't know. It's going to be a tough uphill build, I would say. And I feel like there's more expectations at Minnesota than there are at like Penn State, for example, right?
Right. Like, like if you would have swapped these staffs, it would make a little bit more sense to me. But I agree with you. Like part of it is because I do think Minnesota could be like a really legit Big Ten basketball program. And like, this seems like a high mid-major higher end staff hire.
I would have been hiring Chet Holmgren's dad for all the money in the world. That's your assistant coaching budget right there.
Right.
I mean, Oklahoma, did you see Cade's brother? It was his brother, right? Who was on staff at Oklahoma State?
Already pieced out
the last day of the season. Incredible. Like pull that move, and then I'd be on board. Like get some, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting because there has been so much talent in Minnesota. Like I'm really curious if they can start getting some of these guys and get in with kind of that scene where sort of like Gonzaga recruits Minnesota better than Minnesota. That's got to stop, right?
Yep. I feel like the only other. Do you want to rank these three? I want to see your ranking of the three.
Are we ranking based on like how much we like the head coach or potential for success of the entire situation?
I would say I was going to say quality of the hire overall, but okay. I don't know.
I would go Woodson, Shrewsberry, Johnson.
Okay, I'll go Shrewsberry, Woodson, Johnson.
I mean, that's fair.
But I also think like even if I go nationally, right? I put Penn State and Indiana up there among hires that I like across the country. Like obviously Texas getting Chris Beard's probably the biggest right score in the country. Obviously,
I think Porter Moser to Oklahoma, good hire.
Porter Moser to Oklahoma, I thought was a good hire. I sneaky like Shaka going to Marquette.
I was going to say that too.
I like Loyola promoting Drew Valentine. I like one of the hire I really like was George Mason getting Kim English.
Okay.
No one gives a shit about that, but I thought that was a really good hire. Very low key.
Even Stan Heath, Eastern Michigan, good hire.
One. Yep. For CMU still open, right? I believe.
Yep. Can we talk about Shaka for a sec?
Sure.
I think that could really work.
I love it.
I think he's going to also be a thorn in the side of a lot of Big Ten teams recruiting wise up in Wisconsin, like in the Midwest and just in general. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially if have they hired their assistant? Have they announced their assistant coaching staff yet?
Not that I know of.
I think there could be a assistant with some Michigan ties there coming in, which could be interesting as well. So that's something to watch. And I don't know. I think it's like I rarely think the parachute
sneaky
job
sucks. Big East sneaky sucks.
Other than Villanova.
Other than Villanova. Creighton is Creighton. Beyond that, I see a whole lot of blah. And if Shaka can get dudes at Marquette and make them unique, I think he can definitely win there in pretty like top 20 fashion.
I mean, the middle of the road teams in like Oklahoma, West Virginia are way better than like Seton Hall and Providence. Everyone knows how I feel about Seton Hall and Providence. So I'm well.
They're all down. They all suck. They're not that good. The whole league, and like Villanova just murders everyone, and it's kind of a built-in, like, I think the reputation of the Big East is way better than the Big East itself right now.
Yeah, and just think about Texas. Like Marquette is really, really smart basketball fan base, but they also just want a little bit of success, right? Like the Wojo thing just was so bad that it's so perfect, right? You just need to be third place in the Big East, and everyone's going to be pretty pumped, I think, right? And I think that's a really good fit. I think that Shaka will get guys. I mean, the other thing is playing in the Big East, it might suck, but there's an intrigue to playing in it compared to playing in the Big Ten, right? Especially for a certain type of player. Like if you're a perimeter player, would you want to play in the Big East or the Big Ten, right? So I think that there's guys in the Midwest that maybe want to play in a more open league and don't want to just play in the league of big men. Like that could be a good pitch. And what's the Midwest school that you could go to do that, right? I mean, it kind of fits. And it's
Texas is such a weird job too, because it's like, okay, you're expected to kind of recruit, top 25, top 50 caliber players nationally because you have this massive budget and you're Texas and you're the biggest thing, but I don't think that's Shaka. Like, I feel like Shaka can go to Marquette and still get really good players and win, and it not be all about Texas, right? And what Texas could be and is supposed to be and blah, 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 right? Like, it's just so, like, everything is so distorted with that job that it was always kind of a weird fit for him.
Related, Chris Beard is going to absolutely crush it at Texas. I mean, Texas is going to be, I think, really, 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 really good for a minute. That's going to be a problem. It's going to be Big 12 is going to be fun to watch. Like Shaka got dudes at Texas, but they were never really that good. I mean, Texas is going to be, I think, a perennial top 6 team in the country. Like, I think they're going to be that good. I think the way they play defense like Chris Beard was starting to get dudes at Texas Tech. He's already getting transfers all over the place. It's going to be a problem.
No, they're going to fuck teams up for sure. We mentioned the jobs that were filled that we liked. Any other hires that you liked? I rattled a few off. Any others that you liked?
I think hit on most.
The biggest 2 that are open, right, are Arizona and Cincinnati still?
Yeah, Arizona's the big one there, I would say.
Big one for sure.
It seems like kind of up in there, right? A Gonzaga assistant, Damon Stoudemire. I don't know which way they're going to go.
I have no idea. And nor do I have any idea. Like, Cincinnati's an interesting one because whoever they land there could have ripple effects in recruiting in the Big Ten and in the state of Michigan. But I have no idea who's getting that job.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Has there been any reports that they kicked the tires on Archie? Is that even a thing?
God,
I would laugh my ass off.
Archie and Sean coach them up together.
Oh, co-head coaches. That would be that's the play. Let's go.
I don't know. I mean, Cincinnati feels like they think they're more relevant than they are kind of as a program.
I like this program. Good fan base, good recruiting base, got some history. Like, what else do you want?
I don't know. They're falling behind in the American, man. Wichita, Houston, and Memphis are the powers of the American.
What a shit league that is. What a stupid league. It's awful. And the fact that Temple's in it just drives me absolutely crazy.
It'd be fine if they didn't bring disgrace to the great city of Philadelphia.
You're damn straight. It's so stupid. Putting on Wednesday night, Temple versus Tulane. What the hell is this? Can we talk about Maryland before we get out of here?
Yeah.
3-year extension for Turge. So
are we calling that the Harbaugh?
Yes. That's a very good comp, I think. He had 2 years left. This adds 3 years. So he's now signed through 25-26. I think he's going to make 3.3 this year.
My favorite term is the school-friendly extension.
Yes, exactly. He gets $100,000 raise every year. My favorite thing about his deal is, did you see like the extension bonuses?
I did not.
So if Maryland wins the Big Ten or makes the Sweet 16, auto 1-year extension in perpetuity. So basically, if Turge can make the Sweet 16 every like 3 years, he auto extends himself an extra year. So it's a school friendly deal in that he didn't get a monster raise, but it's a Turge longevity friendly deal in that if he can have, I feel like making the Sweet 16 every 3 years at Maryland is like bare minimum success for that program. But if he does that, he auto extends himself. So it's an interesting game of cat and mouse in this contract, but also like, I mean, a level of endorsement from what's his name? Damon Evans, the AD there, who's like, he's been at the school since 14 as like associate AD, and he's been the head AD since 2018. So like he knows Turge, right? And he is signing on for more Turge.
I think it was kind of a situation where he wasn't crazy about it, but didn't really have another option.
But like you can get a pretty badass coach at Maryland, no? Like if that opens up, that is among one of the better jobs in college basketball.
Yeah. So I don't know.
The biggest downside of the Maryland job is that you're an ACC school in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and you can't win the ACC from the Big Ten.
Correct.
And then Turgeon went out and he got two of the better transfers out there, and now all of a sudden all I see is Maryland in the top 10 or 5 of every way too early top 25. What do you make of a Russell, Ayala, Wiggins, Scott, Wahab lineup? Like, is that a contender, or is that just a bunch of names on paper that seem like they should be better than they are?
That's my feeling, is the latter. Like, I love me some Fats Russell, but he was awful last year.
Like, really bad.
Really bad. Everything about me loves Fats Russell for all kinds of reasons, but man, the big question was last year a admiration? Was there something going on that we don't really understand at Rhode Island, right? Like there could be any number of things, but like, cause he was a dude previously, certified dude. But last year the numbers are horrific.
Like that team, it's a bunch of good players, and I still don't know who the go-to guy is. And if it's Fats Russell, I'm really worried about that.
Right.
And so it's interesting. Like, I think that's an NCAA tournament team. I just think people are getting way out ahead of their skis saying, oh, well, shit, they got the 2 best transfers right now. So now they're a top 5 team. That there's a little bit of, I think people need to slow down on that, but it's a better roster than they had this year. And they got 2 transfers who are good players at positions of need.
Right.
I'm just not crazy about like building my team around Fats Russell. So I don't know. I'd rather go get a guy like Tyson Walker in the portal who probably hasn't played his best basketball yet and has potential, versus Fats Russell, who probably played his best basketball like as a sophomore at Rhode Island in a way.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, I do. Do you? So here's the question on that roster: does Turge and Maryland get the benefit of the doubt to make it work or not make it work? Because at this point, I give them the benefit of the doubt that they'll be competitive in the Big Ten. They'll be an NCAA tournament team. Like last 3 years, should the 19 team have probably gone further than the second round of the NCAA tournament? Yeah, probably. But they still went 13-7 in the league. In 2020, won a share of the Big Ten championship, right? Would have been a 3 seed or so in the NCAA tournament. This year was supposed to be a rebuild. They went to the NCAA, won a game. Like they are getting it done at Maryland for what it's worth.
They have a pretty high floor as a program, I would say.
Sure.
They have a floor to competitiveness in the Big Ten. But I saw it thrown around, this is the best Maryland team he's had. And Melo Trimble, Diamond Stone team, there were some dudes. I know they fell apart late, but there's not a Melo Trimble or Anthony Cowan type player on this roster.
I mean, the Cowan Jalen Smith team was really good.
Yeah, so I think people are slowing down. They need to slow down a little bit on that, but I do think they'll be good, and I think they'll make the tournament and probably lose in the second round because that's just kind of what he does. Sure. And that's sort of why we're stuck in this cycle. And if he wins 2 games in the NCAA tournament, tax on another year, and we keep going.
Exactly. But like this is the great argument of, Maryland as a job looks so good on paper, and like it sees itself as a Final Four contender. It should probably be a Final Four contender at least every few years. But there's also something to be said of, okay, you get rid of Mark Turgeon, you bring someone in who doesn't win, they fall off. It gets real easy to be mediocre really quickly. Like Turge at the end of the day gets him to the tournament every year. And like I always make the argument, right? Don't fire a coach who gets to the tournament every year, because eventually the chips fall your way. You get a good draw. The ball bounces the right way. You hit a buzzer beater. Any number of things happen, and you go to a Final Four. Like that's how this works, right? For the most part, there's 5 or 10 coaches 5 or 6 coaches in the country every year who are building just legitimate Final Four factory type places. Everyone else just get to the tournament every year and wait for your break.
And if you're Maryland, like, and you fire Turgeon, I don't know that you're going, like, are you hiring I don't know who you're really hiring, right? Like, Is it an elite mid-major coach? Like, I don't know. It's not like there's an obvious fit that's out. Like Texas with Shaka, Chris Beard was just so obvious to replace him that it made sense to like figure out how to kind of finesse that one to be. But I don't know that there's that guy from Maryland. Maybe I'm just missing someone, but it's not like there's someone with an obvious connection who's just going to come in and is already crushing it at another high major.
Right. All right. That's going to wrap it for this week. I didn't realize how long we went. I have an appointment in 20 minutes I have to get to. So appreciate everyone listening. Make sure you are subscribed to UM Hoops. Make sure you are subscribed to The Athletic. Subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. You probably have. And if you have, please leave a review in the iTunes store. And then be sure to tip your bartenders and servers and everyone in the state of Michigan. Things are getting a little crazy with COVID right now. Everyone be careful out there. All right. Get your shots and take care of yourselves. See ya.